Welcome to Love Books. It's absolutely lovely to have you all here tonight. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to welcome Alistair Mackay back to Love Books for the third time with his third book. And this really is an absolutely stunning collection of short stories, the lucky ones. May in the book trade is also really known as mayhem. Absolutely everything happens. There's a lot going on. And I have found this book of short stories a real gift at this time. So thank you, Alistair. I'm really loving reading your stories. They're suiting my current concentration span. Thanks and congratulations are also due to Queerness Books, sitting over here, who are Alistair's publishers, and of course they're supporting us with wine costs tonight. Thank you, Urban, and everyone at Queerness. Just a little bit about Alistair before I hand over to him. As I said, The Lucky Ones is his third published book. His first novel was It Doesn't Have to Be This Way. It was a Brittle Paper Notable African Book of 2022. It was longlisted for Best Fiction in the British Science Fiction Association Awards and for the Sunday Times Literary Awards. His second book was The Child, and his stories have been published by Brittle Paper, the Commonwealth Writers, New Contrast, Queer Africa, and many, many, many others. One of my favorite short stories in this volume, I don't know if you can guess which one that could be, Alistair. It's called Why Don't South Africans Read Fiction? Has been translated into Dutch and published by a Belgian literary magazine. Alistair holds an MFA in creative writing from Columbia University in New York City and an MA in politics from Edinburgh University in the UK. Lovely to have you here. Chatting to Alistair tonight is Jared Thompson, who's becoming quite a regular at Love Books, and we love having you here, Jared. He's a novelist, a literary and cultural studies researcher, and a lecturer in the English department at the University of Pretoria. His debut novel, The Institute for Creative Dying, which we have for sale tonight, was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Literary Award and was the winner of the prestigious UJ Debut Prize just last year. Thank you, Jared. Lovely to have you, and over to the two of you.
Thank you everybody for coming. Just to set the scene for us, Alistair, will you please read from The Lucky Ones, the title story, just to get us settled in and calm everyone's nerves, yours and mine.
I don't think they're nervous, just me.
Yeah, it's just us. Yeah.
And this is so amazing to see everyone here. Thank you so much for being here. So I will read from the title story, The Lucky Ones. The first thing Andile did when he discovered the grey pube was pour himself a whiskey. The second thing he did was call Lita. "I have a grey pube," he said when Lita picked up. "What time is it? How can I have a grey pube when I'm not even 30? Lita cleared his throat. His mattress creaked over the phone and a pillow thumped against the floor. Lita was sitting up in bed now, trying to think of something wise and comforting to say. Andile could wait. "It's no big deal," Lita would say. "It happens to everyone and no one speaks about it. It's just..." "Shit, friend," Lita said, devastated. "It's the beginning of the end." "We're going out tonight," Andile said. He hung up the phone. On closer inspection, it wasn't even white. Sorry, it wasn't even grey. Grey sounded muted and respectful. It was white. Sun-bleached, carcass bone white. Dry driftwood white. The jeering, malicious white of pre-democratic presidents. Insecure bosses. The drunk guys at rugby games who shout about racial quotas. The kind that belonged in the rubbish bin of history. He seized the hair between his fingernails. With precision, a quick jerk of the hand, a tiny explosion of pain, and the traitorous curl was out. It stuck to his finger, refused to go gently into that good toilet bowl. But he shook his hand and flicked his fingers wildly until it detached and drifted down into the water. Water restrictions be damned. He flushed it out of his life forever. He was a young man again, dark and luxuriant. A ping from his phone. "It's stress," said the message from Lita. "Your spinster crotch has gone grey because you never let any boys near it." What did Lita know about that? He was never single, always some young, adoring twink following him around. Andile tried not to think about the night he and Lita hooked up, years ago now, but so often on his mind. Blacklit cubicle, glowing eyes and teeth, hope and excitement in Lita's face, like he couldn't believe how lucky he was to kiss Andile. Andile downed his whiskey and found his car keys. All of me went grey waiting for that joke, babe. He texted back.
Thanks so much. I mean, reading this story, obviously the title is The Lucky Ones, and we've spoken a little bit about luck before. But what also strikes me is I was drawn to the origin of the word happiness, and the hap meaning like chance and haphazard, and you kind of happen upon it, and how that has kind of traveled throughout time.
I didn't know that. That's very cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool when I discovered it. And I'm thinking about the sense that happiness is like a chance or a haphazard discovery, and how, like in this story particularly, luck, it's almost like the luck that Andile feels reaches into the past in his experience with, for example, the uncle. And I want you to maybe like reflect on like how luck in the story is like this haphazard brokenness that people kind of, you know, put together, but then when you compare it with other time periods, it's totally different. Yeah.
That's thank you. That's beautiful, and it's very cool to know that about happiness coming from that. And Andile, the main character in that story, when the story starts out, he's in quite a bad mood because he's discovered his grey pube, and he is just feeling really irritable with life. And people keep telling him how lucky he is. Someone at the waterfront tells him how lucky he is. It comes up a lot in the day, in his day, that he has a very lucky life and he's a very lucky person. And at one point he gets really irritable about that. He's like, is it lucky to not be discriminated against? You know, straight people go around not expecting to be discriminated against. They're not like grateful for it. And yet then there are experiences later on in the story with the uncle at his father's birthday party where it does make him appreciate how lucky he is, and that the particular time and space that he lives in, he gets to follow his dreams and he gets to pursue the person that he loves. And he's had these glimpses of feeling lucky and feeling like sort of the chosen one, which I think is such a special feeling when we feel like we are the lucky one. And I guess that I like that feeling of feeling like you're the lucky one for once and your dreams can come true. And I wanted that to tie the story together. And the other aspect of luck, which is more maybe what you were getting at, the randomness of it, of happenstance or whatever, is like the luck of our birth. You know, in South Africa, we're such a divided country. We all have such different lives, and what kind of life we get to experience is so random, and it's just pure luck whether we get born into a privileged life or don't get born into a privileged life, and who gets to be the lucky one and who's the unlucky one. So that's kind of where that thinking was going.
Yeah, and there's like a relative truth to it. And so often like that is like tied to the language the characters use. I'm thinking of Quiet as Ants. There's this line you talk about, metaphors determine meaning. The character's kind of trying to describe how he feels about people leaving South Africa, and that line just stuck with me, like metaphors determine meaning. That in relate with Kingdom of Prophets, you talk about a particularizing language, and how that also, when we're really particular about things and name things, it also shows us how lucky we are, quote unquote. I don't know, can you talk?
So in Quiet as Ants, the protagonist is feeling very lost, and he feels like it's in a period, South Africa goes through these periods, where he feels like a lot of his friends are emigrating. And he doesn't know what the right thing for him to do is, whether he should leave, or he says he doesn't want to leave, but he doesn't want to be left behind. And so he's desperately trying to find some sort of sign, some kind of meaning from something. And he sits and stares at these little ants that are crawling up the wall in his apartment. And he's like, are they fleeing from something, or are they just building something, you know? So the metaphor that you use to describe what you see is so useful for figuring out I guess everything, like how we make sense of the world through stories, you know. And so so the metaphor is the story that we tell, and then that story influences how we feel about everything. Sorry, you asked me a second part to that. Oh, about the language.
And in terms of nature, for that story as well, I mean, the way you write about nature is so vivid and evocative. And I know you kind of reference Robert McFarlane. Maybe you can talk a bit about that experience and how you use
cool,
that.
thanks. So I'm a super anxious person. Everyone who knows me can attest to that. And I find nature really healing for me. And so walking on the mountain is kind of what I do when I'm feeling very overwhelmed. Cape Town, I live in Cape Town, obviously, not mountain in Melville. Although that's lovely, I have walked on that.
Oh, shots fired. Okay.
I love the Melville cookies. I wasn't saying that. It's a slice of nature. Okay, I'll come back from that. Okay. No, so nature for me is really, it really heals me and calms me down and sort of grounds me. And so there's, I guess, a theme that comes through in this collection and a few of the stories is also climate change and that we're sort of losing our ability to access nature and we are damaging it. But in Kingdom of Prophets, which is the story you were referring to, the whole story takes place on a hike. The main character, it's set during COVID, and the narrator's mother is very, very ill with COVID, and he is trying to get the hell away from people. And so he goes for a walk on the mountain, and it's kind of his thoughts interspersed with his experiences. And I've always loved writing about nature. I love writing about forests and things like that, and I didn't really think anyone wanted to read that until I discovered Robert Macfarlane, who's this nature writer who writes so beautifully about the natural world. People are nodding, I guess you guys know Robert Macfarlane. So Landmarks was this book that really spoke to me. And in that he talks about how language it's kind of both what we need to access nature and a barrier between us and nature. And the more particular you can be with your language, the more you can notice about the small details about natural environments. So he talks about how there's a difference in the way light strikes a moor versus how it strikes a bog, and like a moor and bog, they're very similar, but they give you a different feeling. And he was saying that we only love things that we can name, and so the more we notice and the more we name and the more particular we are with our language about nature, the more we can reconnect with it and rediscover our love for it. And then the character in the Kingdom of Prophets then applies that to his mother, and he thinks about the very particular details about his mother that other people might miss or might not notice. Like the way that her one eye doesn't closes slightly more than the other one when she's laughing, and that kind of stuff, like very granular details, which is I think how we remember people.
Yeah, and he hopes that the nurses treating her will kind of see that particularizing in the person, especially in terms of a pandemic where people are
seen as a number. Yeah,
there's just statistics that we see rolling across our screens every day. And you said something about we can love, or we really love the things we can name. That makes me think about, is it little gray blazes? And she says, I actually really like this quote. She said she felt like she'd been slipped a drug that bent reality in what she discovers about her son, or what she thinks she discovers. And talk to us about it made me think about how Ocean Vuong has this kind of quote where he says, "Oh, being queer saved me because it pushed me to innovate certain things in my life." And reading this story made me think of how having a possible or not queer child might save the parent in a way the parent might not think that they needed saving. So yeah, can you talk a bit about?
I love that concept, and it's nice that it flips it on its head about all the damage we absorb as queer youths. Sorry, I followed that train of thought and now I've forgotten your question about.
No, the
bending of reality.
And our queer children kind of challenge their parents when they didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because she doesn't know. Oh my God, is he gay? Is he trans?
Yeah. So she's having her morning is not going the way she thought her morning was going to go. She discovers her young son has taken her earrings, and she finds them in his room, and she doesn't know what to make of that, and she has a bit of a freak out about it. I love this idea that being queer saves us. I think what it does maybe do is make us much more empathetic. Because I guess if you're an outsider, you can observe people in a way that maybe people who are getting by don't have to step back and observe people, and also we can understand what people are going through and can recognize it. So I think maybe that's the gift that it's given me, and maybe it makes us better writers. I don't know. I think as a parent, it is probably an interesting exercise in having to grapple that and figure out how you feel about potentially having a queer child. And I think it's very good for Beth in this story to confront that side of herself and come out on the right side of it. She realizes that she would absolutely still love her child, but I think it's an important exercise to maybe go through, what are my expectations for this human being versus letting him be who he needs to be Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or.
Yeah, it does. I think that's the strength of the collection because, I mean, the story happens in the time span of a morning, whereas other stories take on, many, many years, centuries even. I think was that intentional in compiling the collection? You wanted to do the macro and the micro, because I find it the strength of the collection, that it focuses on the micro, but also takes these long glimpses at time and space as well.
Oh, thank you. That's cool to hear. I, I don't think I was super conscious of that, actually. I don't like short story collections that feel very samey, where all the stories feel very similar. So I did want to play with tone and perspective and the kinds of characters as well. But you're right, I think there is a lot of zooming in and zooming out. And even within certain stories, I like to get like really into a character's head and like very close to things. And then in some of the other stories, it's told in quite a removed narrator's voice, and they can be quite funny, but also quite cruel about the things they observe about human behavior. So I think you can see different things from that. And the time frames I also had fun with, yeah. So there's one story in this towards the end of the collection that sort of follows a chair from when the seed germinates in a forest until it's turned into a chair, and then all the families that intersect with this chair that own the chair. So it's like in a boarding house at one point, and it's in a digs in like the 1700s, and then it's in a student digs at UCT, and it's all the stories that interact with this one object that just travels through human lifespan.
That's actually one of my favorite stories, just to say. I love the way like an object the way it transforms and gets passed down, like can show how we all interconnected, but in these kind of like unspoken ways. And I mean, in terms of zooming in and zooming out, I had fun reading Always in Motion, because while reading it, I was like, oh, he wrote this at FISI. And so for everyone, FISI was this writer's residency at Stellenbosch, and Alistair and I had the privilege. Yes, that's how we met. We had the privilege of having a scientist present to us, and maybe you can speak to us about how that presentation worked.
Yeah, sure. It
was inspiring you. Yeah.
It was. I loved that experience. I think you did too. It was. It sounds so strange when you describe it to people, though. But the idea is, it's run by the chair in science communication. Yes, I think it was called. Yes. And what they do is they get a bunch of creative writers together. We were the first year, and they've done it every year since then. They get novelists and poets and creative writers together, about 12 of us, and they get a scientist to come. And it's a 3-day writing retreat fellowship. And each day the scientist presents their research to us for about an hour. And then the idea is it generates a creative response, whether it's a poem or a short story or whatever it is. And so the year that we were there was the research was on sort of, I forget the technical term for it now, but like how hearts work and
like embolisms or heart attacks.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah, and the way blood vessels constrict. Yeah, exactly, embolisms and heart attacks and that whole system, circulatory system, and when things go wrong. And yeah, that inspired one of the stories in this collection, which I suppose with all of our responses, they didn't map neatly onto what the research was, but it's very like blood themed, and a lot of the sort of metaphors of the body creep into it. And I picture Joburg as a two-hearted beast with like a northern heart and a southern heart, and yeah.
I mean, those descriptions. I mean, the northern heart is like this gilded, like kind of metallic thing, but it's very cold. And then the southern heart is kind of like clunky, but it kind of like really like a steam driver. It really works. But this is one quote that I really loved. You say, "We behave like blood too, clotting to seal a wound. It's no different whether it's a mob or your family." And I thought that was quite poetic, and it goes to speak to how like science or scientific metaphors can like inspire these observations of like, oh yeah, we behave like blood. But the character itself, the lead character of that story, has an interesting double-sidedness that happens at the end that I found quite pleasing. I don't know, can you speak a bit about like how science, do you usually go for scientific metaphors to help you if you really want to think through something, or is it just whatever you kind of stumble across to get your inspiration?
No, I don't think I typically turn to science. I think that's why it was such an interesting experiment for me to be in that context. I guess I usually get my metaphors from like nature and watching people. But on that sort of flip that you mentioned, I do love writing characters that are not bad people. He's not a bad person, but I love sort of trying to better understand people who maybe present in a way that others would take to be villainous or bad. There's the story of the witch deals with that a lot as well. But like I love characters that have like a lot of complexity and a lot of depth, and that you empathize with them and root for them, even if they may be doing something that you think is terrible.
Yeah, and like, I mean, you spoke about how queerness can give maybe a person an insight on how you're othered, and that might give you a certain kind of empathy, but you're not afraid to also show how queer characters or queer people are also problematic. We can also be douchey, we can also be, and that comes up in Going Home. That character by the end, that character is doing something that, and it just, I just thought about the queer trauma and how it happens on both sides. Like queer people kind of inflict trauma, but they also kind of return to the side of trauma to kind of work things out in a different kind of way, to try, like you say, retell the stories of what we experienced as queer men, for the story, particularly growing up as queer men. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's part of emancipation, right? Is the freedom to be a shit person. Like, wasn't that like one of the movements in feminism? Like, women also have a right to be horrible bosses and all of that. So, so I guess there's I quite a lot of the characters in this collection are queer people. So, and some of them are really terrible. The character in Going Home is really terrible, and I keep doing this to myself. I did it with my second novel as well, but it's set in New York, in the period in which I lived in New York, and so I think that people might think it's me, and it's really not. He's really a pretty shitty person, but I haven't had those experiences that happened to him. But what I was trying to play with in that is the way some people can maybe internalize damage. So I think a lot of homophobia is either absorbed and we hate ourselves for it, or it can be like externalized, and he was kind of a bully in his earlier life, and he had just suppressed that. And so I was interested in that tension of like, he was a victim of this thing, but he's also perpetuating it.
And so surprising that he totally misremembered, we could say, doesn't know. And that also, like, you don't know, was I a bully? You question, like you say, the stories you tell yourself. And when someone tells you a different story about yourself, like, was that me? Was I like that?
And there's this thing called screen memories, which I only learned about in the last kind of 2 years, which is insane to me. Like that our mind literally constructs a memory that's a false memory to protect us from the real memory behind it.
But I mean, in terms of that, like the stories we hear about ourselves from other people, like we're always in relation with other people, and I got that sense from Fever Trees, how like we're always, I want to say, quote unquote, contaminated by each other, and we can't stop that contamination as much as we want to. I don't know what brought about that for you in Fever Trees. I will always remember that scene with the lady at the end, where you don't expect the intimacy to come from strangers, but it's a haphazard, thing. It's an intimacy stumbled upon.
Yeah.
Was that something? Did that scene come as a surprise for you? Did you plan it? And what was the thought process around Fever Trees for you?
Yeah, I'm a very chaotic writer. If I plan it, I don't. I mean, I suppose I sort of sometimes plan things, but then I often don't end up in the place that I thought I was going to end up in, because I've got to try and follow where the feelings take me. That character he's lost his partner, and he's sort of going mad with grief, and to the point where he feels like he's losing his mind. He feels like he's losing his grip on reality, and he's so desperate for connection, and he keeps looking for it in all the wrong places. And so I was surprised by that ending when it sort of just happened. I don't know what happens in the subconscious mind, how these things happen, but I was like, oh my God, that's exactly right. That's just the feeling felt so good for me at the end that I was like, that's what needs to be the resolution to this.
Yeah. I mean, is that story where there's a threesome scene, and you describe it as like kind of a circulation of energy. I found that quite poetic. I don't know if you want to say.
No, I was going to say, and he also, the thing that he is so good for him in that respect is that because he's kind of leaning into something he hasn't done before, and it's kind of quite wild for him. He also discovers this place where there's no barrier between what he feels and thinks and what he says, because he's kind of by that point kind of given up pretending, and he's just like, I'm just going to say whatever the hell I want, and then it happens, because this threesome is quite a experimental one, or like just a pre one, and so that's really powerful for him.
I mean, what you said now, I mean, there's no, like, the fact is, like, there's no barrier between him. I know I asked you this question before about no quotation marks, why not in that story? And I found that quite, okay, that relates to, you know, what you said about kind of, you don't know when you're reading the story what's in the character being said or thought and what is he kind of expressing. But another question about form that I had was about a lot of the stories are close third person. You like, but I'm wondering why but there's I think one or two that's from the perspective of the character, and I'm wondering, was that conscious, or is that something is that a mode you usually go to when you want to explore many things at one time? Yeah, I was just curious about that.
I think, well, like, sorry, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to think about what I do when I do this. So much of this stuff just happens subconsciously, and I'm not sure why I'm making the choices I'm making. I think I maybe write in first person when I need a bit of distance from what I'm trying to explore. So I'm trying to remember which of these stories are told in first person. But
I think it's the Prophets one, the hike.
Yes,
that's definitely
okay.
first. Yes.
But also the story in New York with that like 80-year-old woman in a bling
Yes,
velour
the
tracksuit
three
is
reading.
told in first person. So so that was quite fun to just imagine, I guess, a very different inner life. Yeah, I guess it just feels different. My third person is usually so close that it may as well be first person, but I like moving in and out of different characters' perspectives, again, with the lack of quotation marks sometimes, so you're not sure who's speaking or whether it's a thought or something that's said out loud.
Yeah. I mean, three readings, I found it does stand out from the collection. Like the form is very different. And what that story brought up for me was like the ethics of storytelling, especially how it ended. I don't want to say too much, but I don't know if you want to speak about that. That's what came up for you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that is one of the things I'm exploring in that story. So that story is set in a bit like this, I suppose. No, but in a bar. It's set at a reading, where people are reading their work. And one of the people in the audience, so the first person perspective is a woman in the audience who doesn't say anything. But you hear her whole inner life and all of her regrets and all of her lost loves. And then there are people who are up on stage telling their stories, and sometimes there are some very uncomfortable parallels between what she's experienced and what they're saying. And so I'm playing around a lot with perspective in that, and it moves around between various people in the room and how they perceive the stories and what their stories are. And I guess, so the ethics is also like maybe using other people's stories in our own work, and letting our own experiences disappear and not be documented, and how that makes us feel if we don't try to communicate these things.
Yeah. I mean, I was also struck by, I think the old lady's talking about, how some people will go viral and other people won't. And it made me think of like what stories get taken up in the zeitgeist is also part of luck, happenstance. You know, are you writing, is your positionality and what you're writing about popular at that time, or is it not? And it made me think of, as a writer, when writing, should you be conscious of, what is topical right now? Or should writers write against the zeitgeist? Or should they try to straddle a middle ground? I think that's something that writers, maybe not while writing, but definitely afterwards, in seeing how their books are received, think about, perhaps, yeah.
It's tricky. I don't know what the solution to that is. I know I don't think too much about that stuff when I'm writing. I just try and explore the stuff that I'm compelled to explore, I guess, like just drawn to and interested in. I also think it's tricky because the publishing process is so slow. So if you are trying to match a trend, it could be difficult, because by the time your book comes out, the trend might be over. Yeah. So are you currently trying that? No. Yeah. So I don't know what the solution is, because I guess because it's all well and good to say just write what you love and what inspires you, but then like it might miss the cultural moment and people don't think it's relevant, you know.
Right. Yeah. So for you try not to think about.
Yeah, I try not to, and I also I try not to, but I do think I've been lucky in that I think a lot of the themes that I am drawn to writing about are quite topical at the moment. So I think like men's mental health comes up a lot in my stories, and I think that is something that people want to read a lot about at the moment. and I guess it's also kind of a wave of queer literature that's happening in South Africa and across the world. So I guess I was lucky in that those two things coincided. So who knows about the next project? Maybe it'll flop horribly.
I mean, one thing I think you are very, very good at is getting at like gay dating life, gay dating relationships, the horrors, the joys, the ambiguities, and in why South Africans don't read fiction. I found that question like mirrored quite well with the relationship that is happening in that story. I don't know, can you speak a bit to that, but also the complexities of that relationship and gay male relationship as well.
That story it's the only time it's ever happened to me. That whole story came from that sentence. I found myself asking myself that once, and then I'm like, I'm going to write a story that's called that, and that's about that. So it's true. So in South Africa, non-fiction outsell, right? Maybe Kate can correct me, but I'm pretty sure that non-fiction outsells fiction, right? Yeah, there we go. Which I think is also quite unusual. I think in other countries that's not the case. And so the theory of the one character is that we have an empathy problem and that we don't want to imagine, because we're such a divided country, we don't want to imagine what it's like if you're like a tunny on a farm or whatever. You don't want to imagine what it's like to be black and homeless, and vice versa. Like maybe someone on the street doesn't want to imagine that even a rich white lady has like heartbreak and regrets and sadnesses and grief. And then it is mirrored in the story. So the story is set, the two main characters, it's an interracial gay couple, and they are having a bit of a struggle in their relationship. They are talking past each other and missing each other and not able to connect. And the white character's getting all up in his head and like overthinking everything and wondering if he's coming across correctly or if he's being problematic, and it's all kind of getting in the way of their relationship, and they sort of trying to reach across that divide. In a way that's, I hope, is kind of beautiful in the end, but it's also quite excruciating getting there.
For sure. I mean, in reaching across a divide, I mean, I think you show quite well how like language is a part of that. I'm thinking about The Witch. There's this one quote. It goes, Hanret tried to replicate all the clicks with her tongue, and the children laughed. And for the rest of the meal, their silence was softer at its edges. And I was thinking about the character and how she tries to communicate with people very different than her, and how so often bridging gaps is like putting yourself in the discomfort of another's language, of another's frame of view, another's lens on you. And I thought that the story was quite, I would say, like ambitious. It's historical, but it's also like imagining a different rewriting of a history of a particular historical figure or woman in a particular time. Can you speak about that? Did any research go into that? What was the experience of writing that story?
Yeah, you're right. I was trying to do a hell of a lot with that story. It was also, I don't know if you picked up on this. I don't know if I should say this. I don't know if this makes it worse, but it was originally inspired by trying to flip Hansel and Gretel on its head. So the original idea was I was like, I'm going to tell the story of Hansel and Gretel from the witch's perspective, because I was super interested. I went down some rabbit hole about like the witch craze of when was it, 1600s, and how kind of it was just a way of controlling women, and that some people think it was just almost like we're currently experiencing with Trump, almost like a backlash against women becoming more independent and more powerful in society, and so women were sort of demonized, especially self-sufficient women. And like herbalists and people who didn't need anyone to help them thrive in life. And so I was like, what if that whole story was a perspective problem, right? Like we just told that she's evil and that she's fattening these kids up to eat them, but maybe she's literally just trying to look after them. Maybe she's just a kind woman, right, on her own. And so I wanted to tell that story, and then I also wanted to set it in historical South Africa. So it's set at the colonial frontier. And she is in an abusive relationship, and she flees into the Tsitsikamma rainforest and then encounters these two children. And so I guess it's this weird meeting of worlds. They are from completely different universes. And in some ways, I think, things are helped along by her trying, at least, because I think that's the thing maybe in South Africa that we don't do enough of. She's trying to learn how to speak their language and trying to communicate with them. But then it's also maybe an example of how language sometimes fails, and their real companionship is actually silent. They're able to be with each other and care for each other without words.
Yeah, they need more than the language. They need gesture. They need the comfort, the intimacy, and I got the sense like of the witchiness from the story comes from the fact that these three characters kind of conjure a world for themselves in, you know, the discomfort of language, in gesture, in intimacy, in teaching each other through things that are like intuitive, but you don't know they're intuitive until you have to rely on them for survival. I thought that was quite beautiful. So I mean, turning to You Can't Stay Here, I found that story, there was a lot of connection with your former novel, The Child, and a lot of play with shadows. Or there's a reference of shadows. He says he too is nothing but shadow. And it made me think about the covers for your novel and how they play with shadow, The Child and this one. I'm thinking of what's behind that play with shadow for you when you think about or choose an image for your collection and for your novel as well.
Oh, I love that question. That's a very deep read. Thank you. In both cases, my original idea for the cover wasn't what we ended up with, but I do love it, and I do think it's the best. It's the best outcome. I think there's this thing called shadow work. I'm sure you know the term, but it's a term I think in psychology, and it's all about integrating the subconscious mind with the conscious mind, and all of the, I guess, stories we tell ourselves, all the things we believe about ourselves that we are maybe not so conscious of. And often it's about learning to accept yourself and learning to accept your flaws and learning to love yourself even if you struggle with that. So I think that's one aspect of the shadowiness of the books, both in The Child and in this one. I'm also playing with the sort of idea in that story of sort of ancestors as shadows and our place in the continuation of our culture and what we inherit from the previous generation and what is unresolved from the previous generation. So he is, Malusi is in a part of the townships on the Cape Flats in Cape Town where the people are currently being evicted and their homes are being torn down. And he's trying to protect one of his neighbors while that's happening, and he starts seeing all the shadows around him of all the people who've suffered similar displacement. So yeah, that's what the shadow.
And I mean, there's a presence of a child in the story that Malusi kind of grabs hold of to do something with, and there's a line that says his rationale for grabbing the child. He says they have to stop for a child, and it made me think of. I'm not familiar with your previous novel, The Child, but it made me think of how a child is so often the benchmark for society. Like you don't hurt children. Once you hurt children, you've crossed a line. It says something really drastic about, you know, how our society has morphed or become misshapen. And I'm thinking about we don't know what happens to that child in the story. And I'm wondering, was that on your mind while writing it? The sense of children and their innocence, and when that line is crossed, it says something about the direction our society is going.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's almost ironic that he says that in that story, because it doesn't stop the violence, right? And so, I do think having a child in that context is so powerful to make us evaluate what we are allowing and what we consider normal as a society and what kind of violence we think is acceptable. And I suppose weirdly I'm often driven to writing about children, even though I don't have any of my own. But I do think it makes me feel very deeply when I'm writing a story and something terrible happens to a child. It obviously it's awful. So yeah. Yeah, because the whole the first novel kind of is centered on a child.
Yeah. Sure. Okay, we'll open up the floor to any questions, queries, concerns.
Not concerns, no, not concerns.
Objections.
Hello. Just wondering about the title story. Was there a specific decision process to choose this one as the title story, or I guess I'm just wondering, is that a representation of all stories? Is luck the link, sort of the link of the whole collection? or the underlying theme, if you want, or is it just that you love that story and you?
Yeah. Oh, thanks. It's a bit of both. I do love that story. I really love it. I know I'm probably not supposed to choose a favorite, but it probably is my favorite story in the collection. And so it was that. The collection had a different title when I submitted it to my publisher, but I think that was unnecessarily complicated. I think I really like as I was saying, I love what luck represents. I love all of the things that it says, both the good and the bad, both the like insiders and outsiders, who gets to be lucky and who doesn't get to be lucky. And there's often this thing that's, I suppose, is a debate that's happening in like queer literature, right? About like whether we are obliged to write queer joy instead of just queer suffering. There's also something around like giving characters a moment of feeling lucky and feeling chosen, which I wanted to run through the whole collection.
Yeah, but you also show how like the circumstance changes luck, or like inverts luck on its head. I'm thinking of young people's problems, and how the old woman just wants kindness, but obviously things have changed and young people are in charge, and that means things get really out of hand. I don't know. Can you speak to that? Was that on your mind? In terms of especially how young climate activists are treated now, and you're like, why are they so lambasted when they're fighting for, or they're seeing a future that is impending? You know?
Yeah, totally. So the impetus for that story was just kind of rage. I was just trying to imagine them getting the power, like the young climate activists who no one takes seriously or actively like arrests or whatever. So in Young People Problems, it's set in the future where young people have seized control from the older generation who are negligent, and they are exacting revenge in some ways, and they're trying to guide society towards a more equitable future. So I guess that story is the luck is bad luck.
I mean it's weird because you wonder how are you going to act in those moments of dystopia? You know, what side is going to come out of you? Are you going to be the person who hoards the resources and sides with the hoarders, or are you going to be the person who builds community? And I found that question of building community throughout the collection. How do we build community? How do we fight against the kind of systems that keep us individualized on our hamster wheels in our own circuits? Was that on your mind while writing the stories as a whole?
Yeah, and I love that idea, and I think it is something that kind of comes to me as I'm writing. It keeps emerging, so I think it's what I think. But that's kind of all we have is community, and so we can't face any of the troubles that are like coming for us in the world on our own. And so so these characters are trying to find connection and trying to find love and support each other and be there for each other, and they sometimes fail and they're sometimes bad at it, but they keep trying.
Okay. Any other questions?
So in the writing process, it's quite tricky. I just want to know how you draw the distinction between writing from personal experience, but also reaching out to people on the fringes. How to balance that out? It's something I battle with to grasp properly when I try and write.
Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you. I think one of the best things about writing a short story collection is that I have the freedom to be very diverse, so I can include all kinds of characters in these stories. So some of them are very, very like me, and some of them are people on the fringes of society, as you say. I guess for me it's important to show all those kinds of narratives. I think South Africa is a very diverse place, and I know there's a whole debate about who has a right to write which stories, and I totally understand where that comes from, but I also am not interested in just writing about like middle-class white people. I feel like for me that would feel weird, but we're like 7% of the country, like what the hell is that? So I do want to include various different characters in my books, and I do want to tell their stories, and I suppose then it's just a question of trying to do it as well as you can and to be conscious of blind spots. I think I usually try and put a little bit of myself into every character, even if they have a very different background, and try and imagine how I would feel if I had that kind of life. So I guess there's always a bit of myself in them, even if the character's life is very different from my own. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. let's have Anna, and then we'll have.
Your writing's really funny, even when you write about serious things. Is that something you do consciously, or are you just funny?
I think you're funny. Thank you. That's very cool to hear. I hope so. I think sometimes it's kind of conscious, and sometimes it just emerges. Yeah, I don't know. I'm really happy to hear that though, because I kind of feel like my shortcoming is that I'm drawn to writing about quite dark stuff. So it's nice to know that there's also some levity in there. I think it's important. I guess no one wants to just read something that's going to drain them completely. Okay. Apparently I'm quirky. Cool.
My question is sort of a follow-on from the question over here. In the last 2 days in The Guardian, there was an article which I didn't read, but I was not interested, but now I'm interested to know what you think. Okay. The headline was something about like Scarlett Johansson shouldn't be playing a queer character. And I'm interested, given what you just said in your previous answer, what you feel about writers writing queer stories if they don't self-identify as queer.
Thanks. I also didn't read that article. Oh, I don't know what I feel about it. I kind of feel all these conflicting things. So some of my favorite books about the queer experience have not been written by queer people. So A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Yeah. Ooh, he's right. So again, I want to say it doesn't matter, and that if people do it well, that's what matters. But it also would make me uncomfortable if like all the stories that I saw about queer people were not written by queer people. So I don't know, maybe it's a balance. Maybe we need kind of a bit of both. I don't know if that's a cop-out of an answer, but...
Yes, anyone else?
Okay, well, so I'm not a writer. I think it's a lot of writers are in the audience, but I'm interested to see the process that you took from writing 2 full novels to moving on to writing short stories. What you found were the strengths and weaknesses of a full novel. You spoke about the fact that writing short stories meant that you could explore different characters, and obviously in a novel you've got fewer characters that you can work with. So what was your journey moving from 2 novels to then short stories, and the joys and the sorrows of either either way of writing?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. As a question, I sort of do both concurrently. So I have been writing short stories for a long time. I fell in love with them when I was doing my creative writing course. I hadn't really read short stories until then, and then I realized what an amazing form it is, and how much you can move someone in such a short space of time. If a short story is done really well, you can like have them in tears within a page, which I think is incredible. So actually, I suppose that's the strength of them, is that you can really move people really, really quickly, and you don't have to worry so much about all the various moving parts that you have to keep track of in a novel, and all the different timelines, and like when did this character meet that character, and when were they born, and would this have happened yet? And it's just, I guess it's a bit simpler. I actually think for me it comes more naturally to me. I love this sense of just like dropping into a life and then leaving it, almost just like for a moment, and seeing where this person is, and a current crisis they're having, or a current dilemma that they're having, and then leaving again. Although I know that irritates some readers, though, where they're like, I want to know more about what happens to this person. And then the joys of a novel, I guess, are that you can go much more deeply into all of these issues, and you can tell a story where you see the changes in the characters in quite a profound way, and it takes place over time. So I guess that for me is the perk of it.
And what about like when to end a short story? How do you know that the scene is complete, or that you've taken the character far enough? How do you decide? Because you don't want to always end your story on, oh, a climactic thing happened, or a surprise happened. Sometimes it can be a lot more subtle, and you want to play with the subtleties of absolutely nothing happens. This is this character that does these things, and they're stuck, and that's what you want to kind of represent. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think my endings actually tend towards that last category. I think my endings are often like semi-open-ended. It's just you're not 100% sure where this life is going to go and what's going to happen next. But I guess for me it feels complete when you feel like some transition has happened, or some realization has happened, or you just, I don't know, it's almost a bit like poetry maybe, and I don't really write poetry, but I think when the feeling is so pure, you're like, that is the exact feeling I want to leave the reader with.
This kind of crystalline thought or emotion that you finally have been able to communicate, kind of.
I don't actually really like when the ending is very neat and everything feels tied up, because it doesn't feel realistic to life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in terms of what struck me that you're able to do is like span all these hundreds of years, and it was interesting the tension between like writing a short story, but then in the chair you're going through time so fast, and it gave a weird kind of reading experience, because I'm going through all these different timelines, but it's also I do it within the space of like 15-20 minutes of reading the story. So I don't know, it's a nice thing that I'm definitely going to think of as a writer, kind of weaving in to my stories. Did you find it generative for you to like make it short but also go through these timelines so fast? What did it give you as a writer in writing that story?
I really loved writing that story, and it actually I'm already the kind of writer. I'm not the kind of writer who writes like huge amounts of words and then has to trim it back. I'm kind of the opposite. I have to I keep cutting myself short and editing myself while I'm still going and trying to I need a bit more here and I need a bit more here. But with that one, with the chair, I was loving the feeling of kind of zooming through people's lives and a whole generation of a family that owns the chair, for example, telling their whole story in the space of a paragraph, and then they all die, and then it's on to the next family. I don't know, it just made me feel, maybe it just made me feel all powerful. I don't know what it was.
It does, yeah. Because I got this sense of, is it Milan Kundera, that unbearable lightness of being? I got that sense of like you're just going through these people's lives, and it makes you feel like, oh shit, what is my life like if history is like this? I mean, you got the sense from Boy Meets Boy as well. Like, it's like I could literally pinpoint all these different patterns in like my previous dating life. Like, oh yeah, that was that person or whatever. Did you draw on personal experience, just your anecdotal? I mean, because in the queer community we hear obviously experiences. So it's like, oh, what are the patterns that I've been hearing most often? You know, and how do I kind of attach story to that? Yeah.
It was that, and I mean, I think, I don't know, maybe we all go through this. I did have a period of being quite a shitty person while dating. Yeah, so I think I did lean into some of those experiences and some of those things we tell ourselves, like, oh, we're going to be friends, but both parties know you're not going to be friends. And so, yeah, it was fun to play with that. I've already...
Everyone who knows me, who doesn't know me, I'm Alice's husband. I always surprise him with a question. He always hates me for them. Today's question was also inspired by a random article that I saw online.
Oh my
I did not read, but I'm very interested to hear your hot take. The article was about how the evangelical Christian right in America is trying to reposition empathy as a sin. So they're trying to say that empathy is a sin because it makes us feel bad for the wrong people. I'm just like, this strikes me as such a bizarre thing to do. But given that so much of what you were saying tonight was about the power of empathy, what do you think about that?
Well, at least that's, for once, you've asked me an easy question. like
easy?
I'm like horrified by that is my answer. That is like, that's just like from an upside down world. That makes no sense to me. I think empathy is the thing that makes us special. It's the thing that makes us human. And I think there's not enough of it in the world. And I think what I'm trying to do in my fiction, but I think all good fiction makes us feel so much more empathy for people. I can't see how it can be seen as a bad thing. That's wild.
What are you reading at the moment that you're really enjoying?
I just read a beautiful book by Peter Adrian Altini, who's sitting over there, called Saltwater Pool Boy, which is gorgeous. It's really, really gorgeous. And I'm also reading a Japanese writer, Asako Yuzuki. It's called Butter. Yeah, It's great. It's a great book. So it's a weird premise. It's about a woman I'm not that far into it actually, but I'm enjoying it. About a woman who like establishes a relationship with a female prisoner who's in prison for killing her husband by exchanging recipes. So it like makes you very hungry while you're reading it, and also it's about like this weird friendship that's developing.
I wanted to know if once you finish a short story, are there still characters that live in your head and that are like unfinished business? And how do you start thinking about it? Just kind of like say, like, I'm going to put that in the back of my head for a novel later, or like, aren't there any? Basically,
Yeah.
those are, I'm just intrigued.
Yeah, no, that's. I think the ones that are still haunting me are the ones where I haven't been able to make the story work. so I haven't found the right outlet for them, or I haven't figured out what to do with them yet. There's one character in particular that I've tried like 3 or 4 times to write a story for her, and she's so clear in my head, but I don't know what needs to happen. But yeah, so I think these, once I feel like I'm done with the story, I do feel like I can let them go, and they must carry on with their lives now. But weirdly, actually, the characters from my novels are still haunting me. So maybe if you spend long enough with them, that's the trick.
Yeah. Do you see any of these characters returning in another collection, do you think? Do you ever stopping by to check on, how the mother in the little grey blazers is doing? Or?
I hadn't thought about that. That's a very cool idea. I like that a lot. There will be a sequel next year. Everyone has to.
The fortunate ones. Yeah. The fortunate ones. Okay. We're gonna wrap it up, everyone, for Alistair to sign some books and greet and meet and Thank you for being such a lively audience. It was fun. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks to both of you.